Am I? I am live. Good evening. Well, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Lovely to be here at the Museum of Science and Industry. It's lovely to be here in Manchester, city of scientific and industrial revolutions, and the Smiths. Did anyone else hear that the Smiths are getting back together, or three of the Smiths? Yeah. Did you hear? How is that going to work? Without Morrissey and Marr. Anyway, I just read that on the train on the way up and shook my head sadly. It's lovely to have you here. Have you all been around the robot exhibition? Has everyone seen it? Yeah. Great. Okay, if you haven't seen it, I urge you to go and have a look. It is the most extraordinary exhibition. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing to see, and we're very, very lucky to have it here. As you know, our world is populated by robots. And everything that we do now is governed by artificial intelligence of one kind or another. And not just the physical world. Our stories, our narratives are populated by robots. The way that we interact with robots now has profound philosophical and moral and legal implications. And these are some of the areas that we're going to be talking about tonight. Before I introduce our panel, our two speakers, I've got a little bit of housekeeping I have to do, otherwise Gina will get very cross. Where is she? Oh, she's gone. Maybe, no, we will do it, we'll do it. Apparently, if there's a fire, we have to get out. And the locations are behind you. There is a light aircraft there, so if two of you want to get in that and take to the skies, then why not? Behind you, on either side, is a fire escape, and there are loos as well. I'm not quite sure where they are, but they're behind you as well. Oh, thank you. They're behind you as well. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our two speakers tonight, or our two guests who are going to take part in this conversation. First of all, we have Dr. Adam Rutherford, who, of course, I'm sure most of you will know, if not all of you will know. Adam is a biologist, a geneticist. He is also a best-selling author writing about genetics. He is a broadcaster, has presented many documentaries on television, and is also the presenter of Radio 4's program Inside Science. So we're very lucky to have Adam. We have Professor Danielle George here as well. Danielle, no, you could wait. I'm going to do you a thing, and then you come on. Just wait until hold on. Danielle George, Professor Danielle George, an engineer, of course, from Manchester University, as well as being an academic, as well as being a member of the British Empire. Is that right? Member of the British Empire. She's also a broadcaster. She's been doing all kinds of extraordinary television programs. Recently, she was looking for a second Earth with Professor Stephen Hawking. She's just done a two-part series about the rise of the robots, exploring the whole world of what we're going to be talking about today, as well as presenting the 2014 Royal Institution Christmas lectures. So give them a round of applause, Professor Danielle George and Dr. Adam Rutherford. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Just relax, reply, and answer them as simply as you can. Have you had a little wander around today? I know you've seen the exhibition in London, but I haven't seen it for a year or so since it was in London. I think the thing that really struck me, first of all, is that robots and the history of robots just come in all kinds of shapes and sizes and ideas. And so I really want to start off by talking about what do we want robots to look like? Is there some kind of ultimate destination in all of this?
Easy place
You've
to start.
got 1 hour.
Well, it's a fantastic question, because the idea of embodiment is absolutely inherent to the understanding and to our whole concept of automata, as they have been called until the 20th century, or just any form of mechanistic automation that we use to do basically our slave work for us, so, to do the intellectual or actual heavy lifting. Now, we are an incredibly anthropomorphic species. We're obsessed with ourselves. And so in many ways, always, in so many examples, our machines end up resembling ourselves because we like looking at other humanoid forms. We interact better with other humanoid forms, to the extent that in modern factories, where there is a lot of automation, designers of factories have found that if you put a face on certain bits of equipment, that the interaction between the people operating that equipment and the robot itself is better, is more efficient than if it looks like that, which doesn't have a face on it.
I think the thing that really surprised me, I think when we tend to think of robots, we tend to think of sort of metal-shaped men. But robots, and particularly of the 20th century, particularly the sort of 1950s, 1960s, we imagine that kind of robots that would sort of tidy our houses. We've had robots a lot longer than that. We can go right back into antiquity to really, if we really want to understand where robots came from.
Yeah. So the earliest example of a form of automata comes from the Iliad, where Hephaestus, who was the blacksmith of the gods, so made things like Poseidon's trident and I think someone's girdle. Various bits of equipment for the gods, but also designed these tripods. They're only we don't know what they look like. There are only written descriptions of them, but there are two types of robots described in the Iliad. One of the sort of heavy lifters who are tripods of some description, and the others are maidens. Now, in a sense, we sort of bookend a lot of the conversations that have happened for the last 3,000 years on robots exactly there. You've got stuff that does heavy lifting, and you've got robots that look like women.
Can we get my computer up so I've got a little, so this is going right back, this is what you were talking about. Aristotle, okay, the Politics. So this is 350 BCE. If every tool, when ordered, or even of its own accord, could do the work that befits it, just as the creations of Daedalus moved of themselves, or the tripods of Hephaestus went on their own accord their sacred work, if the weavers' shuttles were to weave of themselves, then there would be no need of either apprentices for the master, workers, or the slaves for the lords. That's pretty much sums up kind of what we mean about when we talk about robots. It is that idea that they can do the work for us.
Yeah, definitely. But it's interesting that when you think about robots looking like humans, I don't think about robots in the human form at all. If you say to me robots, I think of the mini car plant in Oxford, where you've got all of those robots, and they don't have the faces on them. You know, there's 1,000 robots, and they're making 1,000 cars.
Yeah.
And they do it better than us, more efficient than us. They're more effective at it than we are. And I don't see them in the human form. I know there are human form robots, but the ones that are very efficient and in sort of industry are doing things that are much better than us at it.
Well, that's the thing. It's become such a broad definition. We can talk about robots in industry, robots that look like us. I mean, can we call my iPhone a robot? Can we call the Curiosity on rover on Mars a robot? Is that fair?
Yeah,
do you think?
I would say this is sort of more of a smart machine, I guess.
Yeah.
But whereas something on Mars, Curiosity, I would say, is a robot.
Yeah. I should say both of you have, in the last year or so, the last couple of years, both done programs exploring these very ideas. So you did a two-part BBC 4 series called The Rise of the Robot, and you did a Radio 4 series called The Rise of the Robot. But I have to say, and I have watched them both, and I have listened to them. They're both really, really excellent. But it's interesting coming from a sort of biology point of view and from an engineering point of view, because in a sense, I mean, you really sort of delved into some of these sort of more philosophical angles about what it is to be a robot and our relationship with robots. And you were talking about some of those earlier ones. I've got a couple of images I wanted to show you. Now, this is from the classic movie, Jason and the Argonauts. This is Telos. Can we call Telos a robot? He's made of metal, and he wages war on Crete. He walks around Crete doing people damage.
He's an automata, for sure.
Yeah.
So he is a non-living but mechanistic entity who has a degree of consciousness. And I mean, I'm not referring specifically to Harryhausen's version there, but also from the Iliad. But he was the defender of Crete.
I think it was Crete. Was it Crete?
So
somebody knows.
Another example of the sort of very deep history of our relationship. We are a technological species, right? So technology has defined us since before we were Homo sapiens we've been using, tool use is rampant throughout the animal world, including us. We've been using tools as our species since before we were Homo sapiens. So in that sense, our relationship with technology is a defining characteristic of what humans have always done, whether it's fire or basic tool use, all the way up to this, to computers. So it's unsurprising, in fact, that our first descriptions of automata, or what we now call robots or artificial intelligences, they're as old as culture itself. And we've got plenty of examples of other narratives, other stories in which people are either turned into robots or statues are brought to life in order to have relationships, versions of human relationships with humanoid-type but artificial forms. So that narrative is as old as culture itself, and Telos is an example of that.
Yeah, they didn't have these in the mini plants.
They didn't.
Sadly.
No. But I think the media and films, as far back as these sort of films, I think they've got a lot to answer for as to why lots of people are scared of robots, actually, because I can't think of many films, I mean, certainly the older films, where robots were good, like WALL-E, maybe, but all of these ones, like Terminator and stuff, they're all bad, and I think that's why lots of people have this bad thing about robots are going to kill us and take over everything.
Yeah, for both of the programs that you did, both the radio program and the TV program, there was a theme that ran throughout both of them, which I think sums up everything that we should be talking about today, and that is, Adam, that you talked about in your program, which is fear and wonder. It is fear and wonder which seems to weave its way through the history of robotics. And in some way, the wonder comes from all the marvelous things that they can do. But we also fear them, this idea that they can take our jobs and they're going to run amok and kill us. And we're going to maybe get onto that a little bit later on.
Well, in that sense, that's exactly right. And in that sense, they are a reflection of us. They're a reflection of what we are capable of doing. Or, we want robots and we want artificial intelligences to exist so that we don't have to do tedious jobs. We are sitting amongst these amazing machines which transformed industry around the world because they were more efficient at weaving or at spinning cotton or doing complex computational stuff or flying or I don't know what that one is. But at the same time, the fear that comes with that is, am I being replaced by a technology which is more efficient than I, which is cheaper to run, which is cheaper to maintain, in a sense, in a slightly different version of this conversation, is a better partner or carer or lover, right? These are perpetual conversations, and we have examples of those fears that date back to classical antiquity.
I want to sort of divide this talk, if you like, into sort of body, which I've called body and mind. I want to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence later on, but I want to stick to the kind of nuts and bolts robots to begin with. Now, you went on a little journey in your program. You went and visited some of these early robots from the 1940s, I know. But even before that, and certainly later than antiquity, we had robots or automons like this. Now, the eating, shitting duck, I think it's referred to. Now, this isn't an autonomous robot, but it has a sleight of hand. These are sort of objects that were built that would delight crowds because it seemed like they had minds of their own. So just talk us through this one.
You or me? I don't mind.
Adam, this is
well. So the shitting duck, as described.
Is that the official title? The shitting duck?
I think it is. Yes, but it was part of a suite or a menagerie of robots or automata created by a French, initially an atomist, but who became a sort of pioneering robot creator called Vaucanson. We couldn't quite decide on his pronunciation. We're going with that.
Yeah.
We're going with Vaucanson. In the 17th century. And not many of them survive, but this was the sort of intellectual culture that this came from we're after René Descartes talking about dualism, separation of mind and body, and that this notion that it sort of fits into a general cultural conversation about the universe being explicable in a mechanistic way, the clockwork universe, and that if dualism was correct, that you could separate out our consciousness and our minds as being an ethereal, not necessarily supernatural, but something which is beyond the mechanistic. And our bodies, therefore, are just mechanistic. They are physical entities. Now, Vaucanson thought, and he was interested in replicating biological activity mechanically with this as his sort of starting place. He started off as, he went to medical school in France and then moved on to robotics when he came to Paris. And he built several humanoid robots, none of which survived, one of which played the flute. And it was the talk of the town, and people would pay to go and see this flute-playing robot, which had a sort of lung system, which, you'd wind it up, and it would pump air in, and it would blow air through its mouth, and it would play a little tune on the flute. He made this beautiful swan, which they did have at the Science Museum in London temporarily.
I think it's up in
Newcastle?
Yorkshire or Newcastle or somewhere.
Oh, is it?
I think
somewhere,
so.
yeah.
Somebody. Barnard Castle, that's exactly where it is.
There you go.
Barnard
And the
Castle.
swan, it's a beautiful thing where it has a sort of a slight trick effect, almost like foil that runs underneath it, makes it look like it's swimming and its head moves. And then it had this duck that it bobbed its head down and ate, or looked like it was eating, and then a few minutes later it would lay a duck egg, which is a poo. It's not an egg.
But I mean, it didn't actually do it. I mean, it was a trick, wasn't it?
No, it didn't process the food itself.
No,
it was a trick. But it was all to do, whilst it was, for the entertainment of the masses, the intellectual culture that all of these things was part of was, can we understand biology just by looking at mechanics? And
was it, Danielle, do you think making things like this was a way that humans could just demonstrate how clever they were now purely as engineers?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, some of the ones, you said I've met some in the US. When I went around, there was some ones that I met from sort of the 1930s, and they would take them around. So Westinghouse, the big electrical company, they designed sort of white goods, and they had this big robot, and they would literally take it on the road and amaze people, like wow people. So it would be a big stage thing, and the whole thing was really, isn't Westinghouse so clever? We can make this amazing robot.
So it was a publicity stunt.
Yeah, come and buy our white goods.
Yeah.
But it was amazing, and they made it out like it was actually listening to the person and obeying what the person was saying and doing it. And actually, what it was doing, it wasn't listening to the words. It was listening to the sort of staccato in the voice and the pauses in between.
Yeah.
In the voice. So it would be, move your hand now. And the way you said that, it would move its hand, and then it would smoke a cigarette, and
So it couldn't speak back.
It could speak back.
But what was it actually recorded? Because I think they said they were recorded on wax cylinders, but I can't believe that was true. The actual words.
Oh, I know that's a different one.
Oh, that's a different one.
Yeah.
I'm getting confused.
So that one was. He was a British guy, actually, that one, and he said he has this most amazing robot, and it would actually talk to him, communicate with him, and it would fire a gun as well. And that was all, he said it was all on wax cylinders, and but I actually got a chance to open it up, and it was very good for the 1930s.
As an engineer, opening it up, were you impressed, or were you like, oh, this is ridiculous?
No, I was really impressed, because when you look at it, you think, wow, for the 1930s, it's amazing. But I was a little bit sad that it wasn't what he said it was going to be.
Well, this is the thing, but back then, even things like with the eating, shitting duck, we were still in love with them because there was something magical, presumably, about them. AI, there was no AI, so they could only be imbued by magic, by sort of supernatural powers, if you like, I would assume, what gave them the thrill.
Yeah, and it just amazed people.
This is one that I love. This is another famous one from of that era. This is the chess-playing Turk. Again, this would, a bit like Deep Blue beating Kasparov in 1997. This was, what kind of year was this, Adam?
So the Mechanical Turk toured for several decades in the 19th century, 18th and 19th century. It did. I mean, you're seeing the reveal here, but in fact, it had a chessboard on the top of it, and its owner toured it round, and it could beat any chess player. But then it was revealed that it had a small person inside.
But for the longest time, nobody could figure out how it worked.
No, it was a con.
Yeah.
But were people disappointed when they knew it was a little person? Wasn't it?
I think that was amazing.
But the interesting thing is, before we had real robots, or robots that had some degree of autonomy, we were in love with the idea of robots.
Yeah.
So we had dreamt about robots before we could build robots. It's not like we could build robots and suddenly
Sure.
there was the idea.
But this concept of being able to do things that we are physically or intellectually incapable of doing, or that would take, an astonishing amount of human power for them to be enacted, that is why, actually, AIs have been beating chess players since 1953. So the first one was a machine called Maniac, which actually stood for something. That's an acronym. I just think that's a really bad name if you're going to create AIs. Don't call them Maniac. The first one was called Maniac. Deep Blue is a much cuddlier name. But Maniac was beating in a 6x6 grid in the 1950s. But it was all part of that post-war sort of, enormous enthusiasm for science and technology that now there is a bright new future ahead of us. And it starts with, derived from Alan Turing, another great association with Manchester, but also just this sense that we were about to do magical things with these new technologies that we now had under our control.
And of course, chess seemed like the holy grail because it's so complicated, and yet it has parameters and boundaries in terms of a landscape. So it seems like the obvious place to test out artificial intelligence. Of course, it turns out that that's actually not the difficult thing. It's actually, from the engineering point of view, it's moving around the human landscape, making a cup of tea, doing all those things that 1950s robots, we wanted them to do. That's the difficult thing.
Yeah.
So this one, just very quickly, this is the first time, this is the Rossum's Universal Robots from the Carol Capek, that's his name. The first time we hear the word robot for real. So this is it. This is 1920-something?
1918 is
1918. So this is the first time we hear the word robot with a meaning, which was, what did he intend to mean?
It's a Czech word meaning slave, really.
Yeah.
And so, the story Dan said earlier about how, the cinema narratives that have severely influenced the general feeling about robots and AI and robotics in the 20th and 21st century, it really starts here, because the plot to Rossum's is that well, spoiler alert, this film was made in 1919, so I think I'm exempt from spoilers here. But the automata, who are the robots, they revolt, right? They eventually overthrow their workers. Now, this is a very different cultural milieu that this is happening in. And it's at the same time as the Russian Revolution, and this is a Czech play. So there's a different sort of political slant on it happening at the moment, but it is the same principle that these are things that are capable of being better than us in some capacity.
So this isn't robots doing our heavy lifting. This is robots as a philosophical reflection of ourselves. Just after that, I'm going to come back to that, but I want to just I've got a couple of minutes, if that's okay. I want to show a clip from Metropolis. This is, of course, Fritz Lang's Metropolis. And I think nothing sums that up better than the transformation of Maria into her robot form. So we'll just have this for a moment. There's more boiling flasks than I remember. Maybe I downloaded the whole film. I'm sure it was like, oh, I'll just do the bit where Maria turns into a robot.
Yeah.
Anyway, you get the idea. I want to do the bit where they change No, I'll stop there. Otherwise, it happened. Oh, actually, that's the bit. When I think of robot, I think of that. My definition of robot, it's kind of that, isn't it? This is what I want from your plastic pal who's fun to be with. It's like, I like the fact that we've gone from Metropolis to Marvin, the paranoid android. But that idea of robot as reflection of ourselves, that is not going away anytime soon. And if you look at some of the robots that are upstairs, some of the robots that are living in our world, robots like Pepper, robots like Casper, who are sort of caring robots that care for people, and robots that do things, they are anthropomorphic robots. They don't need to be anthropomorphic. Presumably, if they want to do heavy lifting, they can just look like the robots in the mini plant.
Yeah, yeah. But then there's that sort of that feeling that, okay, so Pepper,
yes,
or something like that,
do we know who Pepper
it's a
is?
robot.
Yeah, you know who Pepper is. Yeah.
So you know that's a robot.
Yes.
But then you get something like Erica, who is the robot in Japan, who is made to look like, I think the guy took 10 of the most beautiful women or something like that and created Erica.
Yeah.
Has anyone seen Erica? Some people have, yeah.
Is that Ishiguro?
Yeah, Ishiguro,
yes,
yeah. And then people were freaked out by that because she looks too much like. And so, yeah.
Well,
so
this is it. So here we have, you might have come across this term, the uncanny valley. This is, how realistic do we want our robots to be? And this is the famous graph. We like them to be a little bit realistic, but not too realistic. Otherwise, you sort of descend in what's known as the uncanny valley. And I mean, things like Pepper seem to work quite well because they've got big eyes and they're cutesy. But we don't like zombies, for example. They're too close to the bone.
But so in the audience, if you were, would you be freaked out if there was a robot that looked like you? Yes.
I find it quite odd that Professor Ishiguro made a robot that looked exactly like himself.
Oh, you really?
To me, do you know what I mean? It's like, why would you want... Actually, I don't want to ask why would he want to do that. But you met him, didn't you? Did you meet him?
No, I didn't.
Ben met him.
Yeah.
I don't know, the whole thing just seems a little bit creepy.
Yeah.
We might come on to that in a bit. I tell you what I do want to talk about. You were very lucky in that you did see some extraordinary robots. I want to just briefly talk about Valkyrie. Valkyrie is a robot that we're sending to Mars. Just tell us a little bit about that, because robots are now multi-planetary species. We have robots on Mars already, but why is Valkyrie different?
Yeah, so she's not designed for this planet. She's designed for Mars. So all of her parts have to be working in space. And she will effectively go up and make a home for humans on Mars. And that's why she's in sort of the humanoid robot. So she's going to go on to the International Space Station first. And so what she's doing at the moment is sort of trying to walk up to a door, press a door button to open the door, walk through the door, etc. And she can't handle that yet.
They don't have any doors on Mars yet.
But they do on the ISS.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
So she'll be on the ISS but presumably that's going to be very difficult. The ISS has microgravity, and Mars has gravity. So how are they going to test that out, I wonder?
So I think
she is a humanoid.
Yeah. So I think the idea is that if you can, it's quite a tough environment in some ways on the ISS.
Yeah.
But it's contained and it's closed, and there are humans on it.
Yeah.
Whereas, so if you can sort of master that, then she's going to go and make a home for humans on Mars. There's not going to be anyone else there. So, but there will be robots in non-humanoid form that have gone first, like the Mars Explorer and things like that have gone first.
And we actually have a robot on the International Space Station at the moment called Robonaut, which is a torso and hands that can actually do work outside on the ISS, but doesn't have any legs to walk around, unlike this. Now, I was really, really jealous because you went to Boston Dynamics, which you've probably seen all the YouTube clips. I mean, they're absolutely extraordinary. This is Big Dog from a few years ago. I'm just going to play this if this is okay. I've nicked it from your program, but it's unbelievable.
Many of their robots are inspired by animals. The limitations of human form have been removed. Big Dog, their very first robot, was designed for the military, carrying a heavy payload through terrain that vehicles find impossible. And this is their latest creation.
Brilliant.
A hybrid robot with legs and wheels. Top speed 9 miles per hour, range 15 miles.
Just unbelievable. You watch it go down the stairs as well.
This
yeah.
is Atlas's cousin, Handel.
Wow. You can see that there are some similarities with Atlas. I mean, this looks similar. This sort of looks similar.
Yeah, it's a great observation. The upper body is actually borrowed from Atlas, so the arms and the torso are basically the same. You'll see the arms. Here, we actually mount them to the pelvis. And that looks kind of funny, but it allows us to do some interesting things. So now this big torso is actually free to move back and forth and plays a real critical element for balance. So if you think about when you're trying to stand still and someone gives you a little shove, if you don't want to step, you'll do a lot with your upper body to maintain balance. And Handel does the same thing, but it can do that without its arms moving around, right? So its arms are still down in the pelvis. They could be doing manipulation while the upper body is moving around to help with balance.
Great. So it still maintains its ability to do something in application whilst maintaining its balance.
Yeah, but the lower body is entirely new. We basically took off the constraints of a human form and said, well, you know, what if we open ourselves up to a human, but plus some machine things like wheels? You don't see spinning wheels in Mother Nature, but there's no reason we couldn't add a wheel to a leg and get the best of both worlds. It's far more stable and far more efficient than the legged things we've done in the past.
So it's more stable, more efficient.
Mm-hmm. And it's less complex. Yeah, so that's a big advantage.
Yeah.
See, I think that's extraordinary. I mean, then there's no reason why we have to follow natural selection in terms of building our robots and build them as humans. I mean, presumably, Adam, as an evolutionary biologist, is this the way to go?
There is a reason. And the reason is that natural selection is the most iterative process that we've ever come across.
Yeah, but it hasn't given us wheels that can jump over things.
Yeah, no, it hasn't. It hasn't yet. But in terms of
it will.
It will. It'll get there eventually, long after we've gone. No, but in terms of like an iterative, I mean, it's an engineering process where you try and fail, and when we are the result of 4 billion years worth of error and trial, which is what natural selection is. Now, you know, Dan mentioned it there. There is a reason to build humanoid robots for tasks that are in our environments. So the mini plant has no reason to have humanoid robots in it because the whole process is automated. Whereas if you've got a robot carer, or if you need to go into a disaster zone and you send a robot in that has to interact with our normal environment, which includes stairs and things that are this height and tables that are, you know, things that we interact with on a normal basis, then in that case, it is useful to copy evolutionary design principles, because that is what we've evolved to interact with this environment. So, you know, things, you know, they have modeled various animalistic functions there, presumably because Big Dog is designed to be sent into battlefields. I don't know.
Yeah, Big Dog was, definitely. But Wheelie was really, they were trying to try it out for big warehouses. So the idea is that you've got sort of all packing boxes everywhere. It can wheel, you know, pick up a box, hold it, and, you know, they showed us doing it. They literally sort of get the box like that and then wheel all the way down, and it's much, much quicker than if a human did it.
And is this, in terms of companies like Amazon, going to be
Exactly,
doing this?
yeah.
And when you actually visited these guys, what did you think? Because, I mean, we've all seen these, if you're interested in this world, we've all seen them on YouTube, and they all, you know, blown away. Were you blown away actually talking to them?
Absolutely blown away. You sort of walk in the reception, there's sort of the ones that you're allowed to see, sort of thing. And then I went in and saw all these just other amazing. And because now they're owned by Google, they want to sort of develop away from the military. So Big Dog and everything was from the military. Other ones, you know, they just want to explore the sort of fun engineering element to it now.
They've got to have some secret shit going on there.
Massively
like some
secret.
Weird, you know, serious, like crazy stuff going on, I think. They wouldn't even show you.
They did, but I can't tell you.
Did they really?
Tell me about that.
Did they?
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay, well, maybe...
Can we have another drink over here, please?
We've come a long way from Metropolis, though. We've come a long way from Metropolis. Let's move on. I want to talk a little bit about, we've talked a little bit about, actually, there's one, before we move on to talking about, well, actually, let's talk about, this will segue us neatly into artificial intelligence, because, of course, it's not just physical engineering like this. We also want to talk about how we control robots. Adam, you worked on this film, on Ex Machina, and the whole central premise was about artificial intelligence. Just explain your role on it and some of the themes, perhaps, that you're exploring.
Are the audience familiar with this film?
They've all seen it. Have you all seen it? You've all seen Ex Machina.
If I talk about the ending of this film, is that going to ruin anyone's day?
We'll be careful. So we won't talk about the ending, but... Ex Machina, if you haven't seen it as a film, it's a sort of, you know what the Turing test is? So it's an extended version of the Turing test in which a sort of Californian billionaire tech bro who looked a lot like that guy from Boston Dynamics.
Really?
A lot. They all look like that, and they all talk like that, and they're terrifying. Those guys are much more terrifying than the robots. I mean that. Anyway, so there's a sort of tech bro who runs the equivalent of Google in the film, which is called it's called the Blue Book, after Wittgenstein's Blue Book. And he has invented a robot, a gynoid, put it in female form, Ava, played by Alicia Vikander there. And Donald Gleason, who's a coder in the company, is brought in to test Ava to establish whether she has consciousness or some sort of human-level consciousness or not. So effectively, I mean, this is going to make it sound really dull, but actually it's the best film of the 21st century.
Get on with it.
It is effectively an hour-and-a-half long Turing test. And I was one of two science advisors on that. So I was helping Alex Garland, who was the writer and director, with some of the scientific ideas within it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But in terms of AI, this was what I suppose we'd call a super intelligence. We're not there yet, we should point out. Actually, well, let's just talk about what we mean by AI at the moment.
Yeah, well,
so AI means everything from
exactly. So there's
machine learning.
big semantic issues within all of this discussion about robotics and AI, which we generally gloss over in the sort of public discourse on these matters, because they are sort of slightly ill-defined terms. I mean, we talked about this at the beginning. Are we talking about robotics being things that have mechanics to them, and AIs being things that aren't necessarily embodied? When it comes to things like Ava, or to a certain extent in the real world Pepper, they are embodied AIs, which makes them both robots and AIs at the same time.
So that's from Ex Machina, and this was the idea of a fully conscious robot, a robot that actually had consciousness. This is what we have in the real world, and you'll see the similarities. So this is Sophia. So this is a robot that actually exists, and obviously is not conscious, but you can see the similarities. And Sophia made headlines recently because Sophia's been made the first robot that's actually become a citizen, actually been made a national citizen of Saudi Arabia, of all places.
Of all places.
And they had a big announcement on stage, and I kind of, at the time, wanted Sophia to stand up and say, no, I don't want to be a citizen of Saudi Arabia. Forgive me if you're from Saudi Arabia, but their women's rights are not held up very well.
No.
So it seemed like an odd thing. But there you go. Anyway.
But isn't it interesting how we bestow femininity on so many of these robots throughout history?
Yeah.
And that we give that, and even we casually give them female names, which I know is a tradition which is derived from the Navy, right? Is it? I don't know.
But Valkyrie has female form.
You didn't have to do the hand action.
No.
I mean, that I get it.
Yeah, which is actually just the actuators. They couldn't fit the actuators in, so they had to sort of put them up like that, which gave her a bit of a boost.
Is that why they're in female form, because there's more places to put things?
Yeah.
Is that
well, for Valkyrie it was.
And yet you have no pockets.
Yeah. But it is a really interesting thing. I mean, you know, we were thinking earlier on, are we going to get into the murky world of sex robots and this kind of thing? But femininity and sexuality and robots has become, you know, well, throughout history, but it's become a big thing now, hasn't it?
Yeah, I wonder whether, in all of these conversations, I wonder whether we need to invent a new way in which men can.
Where are you going, Adam? Where are you going?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. In which
Have a drink. Have a drink.
Have a drink.
Well,
I think it was after you did the hand actions that I
Yeah.
You did it again.
Anyway, we shall move on. Well,
No, but I do think it's an important
Yeah.
issue within, so many of these conversations are about creating, and so many of the depictions in cinema are about creating subservient female forms.
all looking at a certain type. You know, they're all designed to look this idea of what men think women should look like.
We dealt with this explicitly in Ex Machina. Now, that you can't control what people think about something that you've created after it's been created, and some people thought that it recognized it as the intentions of the writer were that it essentially had a feminist theme to it, and then there were weird conversations in which, with a head of a major studio in America who watched it and said, yeah, great film, but how are you going to get over the fact that it's massively misogynist? We were like, oh, right, well, that wasn't really the intention of how it was written in film. But she is sexualized in the film for a specific purpose, because we're talking about embodiment earlier, we're talking about how, you know, one of the characters says, well, why didn't you make the AI just a gray box? And I could still interact with it and determine whether this is purely an AI that has human-level consciousness. And Nathan, the Oscar Isaac character, who's the sort of tech bro designer, says, well, that's not how humans interact. That's not how biology interacts. All sexual species. There is a sexual dimension to all interactions between all animals. And so it's kind of crazy to create an AI and not include sexual embodiment in that process. And it turns out that the design was based on the character's porn profile.
Let's talk about what we mean by AI, because there are lots and lots of definitions which I get very confused about. When we talk about things like machine learning, when we talk about things like deep learning, when we talk about artificial general intelligence, where are we and where are we aiming for?
I think we're at the sort of very embryonic stages from a technology point of view. So we can do the whole sort of general AI, Siri and Alexa, and you know, it's all very, you know, you can interact with it, but it's still algorithmic.
Yeah.
Where you want to get to is the sort of deep learning, which is a form of machine learning.
Well, this is what I mean. So this is a picture from very famous 1997. Garry Kasparov, who was the world chess champion, being beaten for the first time by a computer, and this was this great moment, the seminal moment in AI. That computer couldn't then go out and make a cup of tea. And that's the point,
couldn't do
isn't
anything.
it?
It couldn't even play snakes and ladders. You know, couldn't do anything else apart from be brilliant at that one thing.
So it's this idea of transferable knowledge, isn't it? We have computers may be very good at one thing, but then that knowledge isn't going to be any good at anything else. So is the idea to get a more general kind of intelligence where you have transferable?
Well, yes, it is, because humans don't behave like that. We don't use brute force to play things like chess. But also, if you're good at chess, if you learn the rules of chess, we have a transferable set of skills, which means you're probably quite good at checkers or a whole range of other games. Right? And that's how humans learn. We are, children are sponges for learning of different types, and we transfer things from one domain to another. So far, embryonic is exactly right. We're really bad at creating artificial intelligences that don't do anything other than specific things. Now, in a sense, that's fine. And AI is going to be like that. It's going to be task-specific for forever, because we will design things which need to be task-specific. Yeah. Not necessarily beat Garry Kasparov at chess, but to, I don't know, make minis.
But games, I mean, actual physical games seem like a good environment to test out AI, because they do have parameters. They are very, very rule-based. So it seems like the right thing. Now, this is Watson. This is another AI system that played Jeopardy and won Jeopardy. I can't remember what year that was in. And then this is the most recent one. So this is Google's DeepMind, playing Go. So do we all know what Go is? You must have come across this. Go is this, it's a game. It's orders of magnitude more complex than chess. And this was the first time AI had actually beaten a Go player. And it was interesting because there seemed to be a creativity in the way that the AI worked out how to do it. It wasn't just brute force. When the AI was actually playing, when DeepMind was actually playing the player, it did a move that the player couldn't believe. That the move seemed so dumb, so wrong, that in 2,500 years of humans playing chess, it had never been done before. And the human player thought, oh, well, the computer's lost. And the computer then went on and won. And it was this moment that people involved in this industry have taken. Now, this is a significant thing that's happened.
It was really significant because it did it without any human interaction.
Yeah.
So AlphaGo didn't learn from a human. It learned from first principles, and it learned it to expert level in a matter of days. And no human has been able to do that, full stop.
Yeah.
And to be able to do it without literally any human interaction.
Yeah.
So it wasn't algorithmic in that way. It was data representation, and that was the big step for them.
There seems to be that we're going to need some kind of paradigm shift to take us to the next level, to take us to some new level whereby AI becomes truly a true sort of general intelligence with transferable knowledge or transferable skills.
One of the things that was someone commented on recently in the last couple of weeks about this particular match is that it's impressive that it won at AlphaGo, and that's been developing in the last couple of years since that particular match. But more troubling, this was a comment from a coder who said that it's going to take us hundreds of years to actually understand the complexities of how it made that decision. Now, this is one of the problems with, there's two problems here. The idea that this is sort of black box technology that we can't open, that we don't actually understand. The algorithms are only as sophisticated as the data you feed into it and how they are coded. And if we don't understand how they are making decisions, then that is potentially a problem for the outcome. But the second thing is that, this is a point that has a political element to it. We think about the leaders, thought leaders in AI and robotics at the moment. Well, in 2015, Google bought 10 companies, all of which were AI or robotics, including Boston Dynamics and including DeepMind.
Well, talking about the politics, yeah.
They have no obligation to share that information with anyone.
Well, this is interesting. So this is Vladimir Putin this year or last year. AI is the future, not only for Russia, but for all humankind. It comes with colossal opportunities, but also threats that are difficult to predict. Whoever becomes the leader in this sphere will become the ruler of the world.
I just want a sort of maniacal laugh at the end of it.
But okay, we've talked, if our theme is wonder and fear, let's just talk about fear quickly. Because, of course, when we talk about general intelligence, we talk about robots and AI of the future, of course, we start getting into this idea that robots are going to run amok. And people like Stephen Hawking have very famously said that we're going to be enslaved by robots. Did he say that? I don't know if he said that exactly.
Probably.
Artificial intelligence.
Artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And Elon Musk and Sam Harris and all kinds of philosophers have talked about this. And I wonder what you guys think. It's one of those subjects we keep coming back to. If we talk about things like self-driving cars, all kinds of moral, legal issues get thrown up by AI.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's, so from my point of view, technology isn't the issue. I think, like engineers, technologists, scientists, we've got it licked in a way. We know where it's going, and it's an interesting challenge to us. And there are lots of things that we haven't discovered and haven't done. But the appetite, the opportunity, and the intelligence is there to do that. So I have no doubt that technology-wise we'll do it. But there are huge ethical issues. And if you go back to Sophia and you go back to like the sex robots and things like that, it's the ethical side of things that is the big challenge.
Well, it does feel like we're poised on a step to go somewhere. There seems to be a lot of areas which are still incredibly grey that we don't know quite how they're going to pan out. And there are people, Professor Alan Winfield we were talking about, who's is a robot ethicist. That's his job, is to think of these questions. When we think about Asimov's 3 laws, he's like, well, no, these 3 laws are not enough. We actually need a lot more laws, and we need to dig a bit deeper.
Yeah, more like guidelines.
Yeah.
But the
We're going to throw it out to some questions. In a minute.
I agree with what Dan's saying. I mean, this is classic dual-use technology, right? The tools themselves are neutral. It's the deployment of them and the understanding of particularly complex things that almost everyone doesn't understand how they work. And learning algorithms, things like neural networks, are things that even the people who design them don't necessarily understand how they work. However, I will say this, right? I am a techno-optimist, and I find that every time someone prominent in the public eye says something about the global threat or an existential threat that is from robotics or AI or both, it tends to coincide with them having a book to sell.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And,
Or a new car.
and when you talk to actual scientists who work in AI, almost none of them are actually working on taking over the world.
I have a book to sell, I should say. I do have a book to sell, and I think I'm terrified. But, well, we could talk endlessly, but I've got a few questions that people have tweeted in, and we've got a roving mic. So if you've got a question, I'm sure we'll, in the next sort of 10, 15 minutes or so, this will come up again. Put your hands up if you have a question. We'll get a mic to you. Here's a couple of ones that have been tweeted in. This is from Mark Slattery. What's the one job that you think robots will never be able to perform? Who wants to have a go at that?
Well, so I'll try.
Yeah, have a go. Have a go
because
with
it's something that we talked
and then
about.
we can get hands up if you've got a question. There's a hand there. Yeah.
So something we talked about at the university when we're talking about, because obviously there's lots of people who do the sort of machine learning side, AI, and the robotics control side as well. And so we had this conversation about, could you actually take over as an academic, as a lecturer, as a teacher? Could you actually do that? And at first it was sort of like, haha, no, of course you couldn't. But then you're like, oh, actually, could you? and it was like, could we be superfluous requirements? Yeah. But I mean, I don't think we could actually, because of what you bring, and I think you're so far away from an artificial intelligence bringing that.
Well, this is it's too far away, and the human brain is really bad at seeing things beyond a decade or so into the future. We can imagine a very hazy future where AI gets a lot better, but not to the point where it has the nuances that human behavior has with each other. But
I have to disagree with that.
Well, you will disagree, I know.
I have to disagree with that because I'm an empiricist and believe in a mechanistic universe and that there is no supernature and that we are a product of 4 billion years worth of evolution, which is understandable in concept. We are centuries from being able to understand it, but if we are mechanistic, then it has to be reproducible.
So in answer to Mark's question, what's the one job you think eventually every job that humans can do will be able to be done as well, if not better?
I'd say the one thing that robots will never be able to do is be a Radio 4 presenter.
Correct. Exactly. Someone had a question. Do we have a mic for the... You have to if you hold your hand up high and wave it about, then we'll get a mic.
Hello. So I guess it follows on from that. At what point will AI be able to program other AI, and it will be out of our hands altogether?
That's a good question.
That's a great question. I wish I knew the answer.
So this is a guy called Max Tegmark has written a book about this. He's actually a cosmologist, but you know Max Tegmark. He's written a lot about AI and technology, but he imagines a scenario in which the first AI then becomes logarithmically better at designing its own AIs until the point where there is... Actually, I didn't finish it. I can't remember what happened.
Well, it's a really good point. And actually, Nick Bostrom, who is a philosopher and talks about all this particular area, he has a maxim, which is if you design a piece of AI to go on a task, like make a paperclip, no matter what, it will just keep making paperclips until the whole universe just turns into a whole universe full of paperclips, and there'll be no way to turn it off. I don't know if he had a book out at the time.
Yes, he did.
I think it was called the Paperclip Book.
No, it was called Superintelligence. It was. It's in Superintelligence.
Oh, right. Okay.
His best-selling book on this subject.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. But I don't know how far the Paperclip universe is.
Well, it'd be very organized.
Yeah. Things would be kept together nicely.
Yeah.
But I think it depends on what we mean by AI as well. You know, AI, now we have AI, and in some ways, actually, it is creating more AI. So it's happening now in some ways.
Well, AI is a design tool. We use AI to design
Yeah.
things.
And it designs other AI now, really.
Yeah.
But it's not the AI that you might think of. We're out of control now, and it's going to.
One of the issues that is sort
paperclips.
of that I think it will be of interest is that we're at a stage in many branches of science and also financial markets where the amount of data that we're generating is just colossal and unmanageable. And so in my particular field, genomics, we can now harvest people's genomes with great ease and at very low cost. But the amount of information that is kept within one person's genome, and we now have several million of them, is way more than we have skilled geneticists who can do it, who can actually process those data. And Dan, you were telling me about the same with cosmology.
Yeah, the big telescope, the Square Kilometre Array. So Square Kilometre Array is a big radio astronomy telescope, or lots of sort of dishes that make up one big telescope. And when it's fully formed, it will effectively be 1 square kilometre's worth of collecting area. And it will collect in one day the same amount of data generated by 10 times the global internet traffic. 10 times in one day, and that's just one experiment.
So having learning tools, having self-learning tools that actually can recognize patterns in those types of data sets, which would simply be impossible for humans to do, that is an example of where AIs will be designing their own algorithms for processing information at speeds that we just can't resolve.
Next question. This is a Twitter question from Yuri_3_rover. Should we be investing in developing more intelligent robots to explore Mars rather than solving the technical issues of sending humans? Yes.
Yes, and we do.
Yes, and we do.
And we are.
And also we're going to send humans at some point.
And we're going to send humans,
Probably not for a while.
No, but Valkyrie's going, or several Valkyries are going in the next 5 years.
Really?
Yeah.
To Mars?
That's what NASA say, yeah.
To be honest, I just don't, I can't see
Well, they're
it.
not working at the minute. They're all off.
Exactly.
So
Having a day off.
maybe they won't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We seem to be very, very liberal at the moment with our space dates. We're talking about this year for this, next year for that. And
5 years.
Space project takes a long time.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, here we are, over here. We've got a question.
Good evening. In the UK law, there's lots of protections for animals, for example, and even when you get to quite simple animals, we've got laws. So, for example, you can't give you can't feed vertebra to lizards and things like that. So, when we develop AI, at what point do you think the AI would need legal protection from abuse, for example, from like humans or other AI maybe?
It's a really good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean,
I think it's a superb question, and it's one that people like Dallas mentioned him, Alan Winfield, who's the robot ethicist down in the Bristol Robotics Lab, does talk about. I don't think there's a simple answer to that, but I think one thing that we haven't talked about, and I don't think we talk about enough in having these long-ranging conversations, is, is it capable of feeling pain? Now, I don't quite understand the point. I don't mean this in a sarcastic way. I don't understand. I can't conceive of the point when we could determine whether an artificial entity was capable of receiving pain. You think you have a thing like that? Sure. I absolutely agree, but I'm not saying it's the only thing, but I think it is. I do think it is a key idea in affording human-type rights to non-human entities.
There was a new series of guidelines, I think 23 new guidelines that I noticed, and I can't remember what they all are, but that was one of the questions that addresses that. But this is a whole area that people are starting to get to grips with, certainly in the last 10 years. I remember interviewing Alan, 10 years ago on Bango's a Theory, and we talked about Asimov's 3 laws, and he sort of bumped it up to 5 then, and I think we're sort of up to 23 now. But you're right, as AI gets more and more sophisticated, as artificial intelligence becomes more and more general, then you can understand this becoming a real issue. On a slightly different note, from Tom Gartrell, what is the most pointless robot ever?
C-3PO.
Oh, boo! Really?
You're meant to be my people. Surely C-3PO has no function in the Star Wars universe.
Well, he does have a
Oh, he
function.
translates Jabba the Hutt.
No. In C-3PO in Star Wars, in Shakespeare, you'd have characters like that who were known as the rude mechanicals, who were minor characters, generally with regional accents, who would be there in order for a humorous relief. And C-3PO is literally
like
and
Jessica.
metaphorically a rude mechanical. As is K9, as is Metal Mickey. Actually, Metal Mickey a bit more than he was the star of the show. Do you have a pointless robot that?
Oh, I'm not quite sure I do.
No. Okay. Well, the next question here that's been tweeted: do you have a favourite movie or TV robot?
There's a guy down there. Favorite TV? Well, I'd have to say Ava.
Ava.
I'd have to say Ava.
Okay.
Why?
Well, because I helped design her.
Fair enough.
No, but also she outsmarts. Spoiler alert. Sorry. She outsmarts everyone in that movie, and yeah.
Mine's CP3O.
Mine's Metal Mickey. Okay, over.
I prefer BB-8.
What did Metal Mickey do? I don't even remember what Metal Mickey did. What was his thing? He had a big mouth. Or the Smash robots from the mashed
They
potato.
weren't robots. They were aliens.
I love those.
Sorry.
We could do an hour on favourite robots. Yes.
So coming away from protocol droids, who do have a very real purpose, this is a more practical question. Would you buy a self-driving car that would intentionally kill the occupants of the car to save more people outside it?
Well, this is the classic question. This is the kind of the sort of moral dilemma that people bring up all the time now. And people always, I heard, in fact, it was Brian Cox last night talking to Eric Schmidt. That question came up, and it was, would you get yourself in that situation, I think they said. It's like, at what point would you be in that situation? And the answer is, well, you'd try and get AI to be good enough that you wouldn't get in that situation. And then if you were, how would you deal that as a human being? I don't know is the answer. But I would go I've been in some very early self-driving cars from a decade ago, and what is extraordinary is how quickly you get used to them. And these were much more basic than they are now. And after 5 minutes, you're putting your hands behind your head, and it all seems perfectly reasonable. And humans are like that. We fear technology, and then once it's upon us, we get used to it incredibly quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a driverless car point of view, so I have a 3-year-old, and I have a conversation with a colleague of mine who also has a 3-year-old, and I'm convinced that she won't have a driving license as I have one, because when she becomes of age, driving age, then...
It's not Game of Thrones.
Then driverless cars have made such an advancement from where we are now that her driving license will be very different to mine. So I think it's here, and I think it will happen in my lifetime.
But all those
legal
legal questions, like who is responsible if there's an accident, is it the manufacturers, is it the AI developers, is it the person sitting in it? These are all things that need to be worked out soon and are being worked out.
But this is what I'm saying about the whole sort of ethical, political, financial side of robotics and AI. The technology isn't the issue at all.
Yeah.
It's all of the other things that come with this subject.
A question at the back.
Well, in reply to the question, the most useless robot.
Yes.
And in my opinion, I'm sure a lot of people here may share my view, is Ernie.
Is who?
Ernie.
Oh, Ernie, as in the National
bonds.
Lottery, as in
I'm
the...
still waiting for him to pick my bond. I've had him for over 30 years.
Can I just play devil's advocate here? Thank you for that. I was on the tube the other day, and I noticed an advert for, I think it was Alexa or Google Home or one of these new sort of Siri-type robots. And it was a picture of it was a sort of a kettle with a picture of Siri or whatever it's called, Alexa, next to it. And the big thing was, you can just say to Alexa, just turn the kettle on. And to me, looking at that, it just seems so ridiculous because you've got to pick the kettle up and fill it with water first, and then put it down. And then the idea of like going away from it and sitting down and then asking you to put it on. And the guy had even drawn the on button, so you could just do that. I still haven't got to grips, so I'm still not sure why we need things like Alexa. And it's always things like, turn the heating down 2 degrees. And I just do that. Why do I need Alexa? I can understand if you're not mobile and those sorts of reasons, but...
Should I tell you why it's good?
Tell me why it's good.
Back to my 3-year-old.
Okay.
So we were talking
this is
about...
me being old and...
Peppa Pig, and and she wanted to ask a question about Peppa Pig. I didn't know the answer.
Yeah.
And so I was like, hey, Google, we've got like a Google Home thing. Hey, Google, what's Peppa Pig's friends called that's got a pink dress on and it looks like a bear or something? And Google was like, oh, that's Wendy the Wolf. And you're like, that's amazing. And so now my 3-year-old interacts. She comes in, she goes, hey, Google, the dinosaur with the lots of spikes, and Google will tell her the answers. And so I think it's a new form of learning for children as well.
Okay. I'm not convinced. I don't want to pick a fight with your 3-year-old. Do we have any more questions? There's a lady over there. Yes.
You guys said that AI would eventually be able to do pretty much anything humans can do. Do you think there's any jobs that we would keep for ourselves?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. And of course, all these types of conversations always get to the question of what happens, are we going to lose all our jobs? And I think that it's a case of jobs changing. It's not just jobs losing. Eric Schmidt last night was asked the same question. He talked about lorry drivers. Well, you know, you could imagine a self-driving lorry. Well, why do you need actually somebody in the cab of the lorry? Well, lorry drivers do more than just driving the lorries. They've got to unpack the lorry. They've got to do the paperwork. They've got to unpack it at the other end. So if AI is going to take a job, then it's not like we're going to lose jobs, but our jobs will morph around it, if you like, or change around it as our landscape changes.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's, we are in danger of falling into what's known as the technological fallacy, which is that technology does make jobs redundant, which it does in specific cases. But as Dallas is saying, what actually happens is that industries change in order to reflect the technology that is making jobs easier or changing what is being produced. And I did a panel event a bit like this at the University of Sheffield not that long ago, in which one of the panelists argued that the washing machine was one of the great tools of women's liberation, because it effectively freed up a lot of time that would have been spent mostly by women doing the long, arduous task of washing clothes. Now, that is what technology is for. It is to create more spare time for us so that we don't have to do things which are mundane or that could be done more easily by things that are less bothered by being bored. So in that sense, it may be that you know, what we need to get used to is having more free time and being more creative.
Well, you look around here, you look around this museum, and we see, you know, the monuments of all these different scientific and technological revolutions that everybody panicked at the time are going to take our jobs.
Yeah, it's nothing new.
And here we are still here, working really hard too much.
Yeah, it's nothing new. I mean, you know, the first industrial revolution, lots of people thought this is dreadful, it's going to take everyone's jobs. And of course, it did take some people's jobs, but it also created new ones. Yeah. And I think that's same now for the second industrial revolution or Industry 4 or whatever you want to call it now.
How are we doing for time, Gina? 5 minutes. Did someone have a question? I forgot my glasses.
There's one over there.
Okay, one over there. Will you point, because I haven't got my glasses on. Has someone got a microphone? Yep. Oh, yes, here we go.
Hello, yeah.
Hello.
What about humans having cyborg babies because they're better, and then cyborgs having AI robot babies because they're better and is essentially being out-evolved?
Man! That's like next level. That's like next level. Well, I suppose, you know, are we going to get out-evolved by, that's the question, isn't it? Are we going to, is this just our techno fear that we're...
It's one of the lines in Ex Machina that this is the next stage of evolution. I don't think it's correct, and that's because, well, it's certainly not correct in the current time frame because, well, we don't really understand human consciousness and intelligence, let alone creating a human-level consciousness in anything artificial. So we're decades away from understanding it in us. We also are, I mean, I need to turn to the engineer on the panel for this point, but I mean, the main limiting technology is battery power, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
We have an amazingly efficient way of generating energy, which is a 4 billion year head start on that.
Yeah. There you go. So I was doing a program called The Search for New Earth, where I was talking to lots of people around the world about trying to colonize another planet, and where would that planet be, and where would we go, blah, blah, blah. And so I was talking to a guy at the University of California, and he's doing he's making these brilliant little sort of satellites that are this big that are going to go out to the solar system and look for the planet. And I was like, okay, so you can make something that's this big and you can take them, but what about humans? And he was like, well, no, humans in our form wouldn't go, because we're going to evolve, and it would just be our minds that would end up going. And I was just like, what? I can't quite comprehend that. And but he was a firm believer, and there were lots of people around in the US that believed this. That it would be, that's how we would evolve, and they're smart people, these are smart guys. That's how we would evolve. We wouldn't evolve. I mean, he said that our human form is not optimized at all.
If only someone on this panel had written a book about the future of
yes,
human evolution,
if only.
in which the answer was not that.
Prediction is very difficult, especially if it's about the future. I think we shall. I can't remember who said that. Someone.
Yogi Berra.
It could have been Yogi Berra or Metal Mickey. We're going to leave it there. Before we thank our panel, I'm going to promote, if that's okay, my book. No, not my book. The next event here at the museum, it's Project Doomsday. Did someone just shout at me? No. Project Doomsday on February the 8th at 7 p.m. An interactive show that sees the audience react in real time to an intelligence briefing by expert scientists and performers with just 60 minutes to make do-or-die decisions and avert global catastrophe. It's kind of like a choose-your-own-adventure thing, I think. Project Doomsday, February the 8th, details of which will be on the museum website. Will you please thank our wonderful panel, Dr. Adam Rutherford, and Professor Danielle George. I'm Dallas Campbell. Thank you very much for having us. Thank you.